Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says the structural fragility of union territories. The article here is speaking about two issues. One is the resignation of the MLAs from the Puducherry Assembly. The other is it is focusing on the functioning of the union territory with legislature. Let's try and understand what is the author trying to convey. When we look into the first issue, it speaks about resignations of the MLA from the Puducherry Assembly. What is this speaking about? This is speaking about the anti-defection law. We would not be discussing this primarily because we have a video recorded by Samacha which will explain you what is anti-defection law, what are the provisions of it, and why it is in picture when it comes to the Constitution of India. But the other part of the article also speaks about the functioning of the Union Territory with legislature. Our primary focus will revolve around this particular issue. When we speak about resignation of MLAs from the Puducherry Assembly, one of the important pointers from the preliminary examination. Let's say for example, I am an MLA from a particular constituency. Let's say I have been given the power to even resign from the post of member of Legislative Assembly. So what will happen? Let's say I don't want to be an MLA from a particular constituency. I put in my resignation, but this particular resignation, if it is voluntary or genuine, has to be attested by the speaker. So it is the speaker who will decide whether this particular resignation is voluntary or genuine, or if it is by force. In case the speaker feels that it is not voluntary or genuine, then the speaker is not obliged to accept that particular resignation. This is what we have to understand from the first perspective. But do remember, the entire analysis is already present on our YouTube channel. Kindly look into it. The second part of the article is primarily focusing on the union territory with legislature. First important question: why are two divisions when it comes to the union territory? One is where we have the union territory, which is directly controlled by the union government, which is headed by the administrator. Then we also have the union territory, which also has the legislature. Why is this differentiation? Why is this compartmentalization? When we look into the first part, the area may be comparatively less. There might not be number of people. So what we have is the union government, which administers this union territory, directly controlled by the administrator. In the second issue, let's say for example, we have Delhi, or we take the example of Puducherry, or let's say for example the recent addition, which can be Jammu and Kashmir as well. What is happening here? We have the union territory, but it also has the legislature as well. So the first question that we need to answer is, why is there a legislature for the union territory? That is to make sure that the democratic aspirations of the people of these union territories are met. What do we mean by it? Let's say for example, we take the example of Puducherry. Puducherry happens to be a union territory. It also has the legislature as well. When you consider this particular region, there are people, there are a large number of people, they have their own aspirations. They want to come up and make up with their own laws so that they can empower their region as well as themselves, which is why in order to give boost to their democratic aspirations, we have this particular differentiation. So on one side, we have the union territory without legislature. On the other side, we have union territory with legislature, so that the people in that locality are able to meet up to all the democratic aspirations in that particular region. But the article here and the author is trying to convey that yes, the constitution has this framework. Yes, the parliament has also made this laws. But when it comes to the spirit of the legislature, that is not being met, as they are not completely independent. They do not have complete autonomy. And as a result, it is indirectly the union government which is controlling the union territories with legislature, says this article. What does the author trying to convey? He conveys this particular concept by giving three important concepts. The author here looks into the constitution. He says we have one of the important articles, article 239A, which says that parliament may by law create for the union territory of Puducherry a body, whether elected or partly nominated and partly elected, to function as a legislature for the union territory. It also speaks about having a council of ministers both with such constitution, powers, functions in each case as may be specified in the law. This law can be created by the Parliament of India. Do remember, when you look into this particular section, there is or here. There is or after the Council of Ministers as well. So the author in this particular case goes on to say that this very provision as given under the Constitution, which was not originally present but which was inserted in the 14th Constitutional Amendment Act in the year 1962, is absurd and weird. Why does the author say so? That is because the legislature cannot exist without the Council of Ministers. Why? Because the legislators are elected, and after they are elected within this particular compartment, it is they who are elected as the executive who go on to become the Council of Ministers. So the author in this particular case speaks about 239A of B, where he says speaks about or condition, where he says that legislatures are also important, Council of Ministers are also important, but when you look at the bare reading of the Constitution, it puts in or, which means either that condition can happen or this condition can happen, which means to say that this very idea is weird and absurd, says the author. Then he also brings into another context about nomination. What does the author say? The author says that a particular MLA can be appointed, which means he need not necessarily be elected. In this particular case, the author says when you're giving the legislative power to the union territories, most of them should be elected. Why are you coming up with a compulsion of partly nominated? If you are coming up with a compulsion of partly nominated, the parliament will have every right to bring changes when it comes to the legislation, and this legislation may also include that nearly 50% can also be nominated. Ideally, the entire section of the legislators should be elected, but because there is in the constitution a word called as nominated, there could be a provision introduced in a particular law where simple majority is required to bring changes in this particular law, where they can bring up a clause saying that 50% can be nominated. So how is it democratic? How is it meeting the intended standards of democratic aspirations, is what is the author trying to convey. So he says that the very wordings in the constitution is quite weird and absurd, says the author. Apart from this, when you look into this particular article, it also discusses one of the landmark judgments as delivered by the Supreme Court of India. What is it? When we look into the Union Territory of Puducherry, it is not one single constituency or one single connected area. What do we have? We have unconnected districts like Yanam in Andhra Pradesh, Puducherry, Karaikal, and we also have Mahe. So what we actually have is the unconnected districts. So when we are speaking about the Legislative Assembly, there are about 33 seats when it comes to Puducherry. 30 are elected. The other 3 that we are speaking about are nominated. Who are these nominated members? They are the members who can be nominated by the central government. There was a controversy recently. We have the BJP government at the center, which had nominated about 3 people. So these 3 people were not accepted by the Puducherry government in Puducherry. Why? Because they said in case the central government is making nominations to the part of Puducherry, then they have to consult the state government, that is the Puducherry government, said the government of Puducherry. But the central government said that there is a particular provision called as section 3 of 3 in the Government of Union Territories Act of 1963. According to it, the central government may nominate not more than 3 persons, but these 3 persons should not be in the government services. So what did the central government say? The central government said that they would be in a position to nominate any person without any criteria. This went to the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court of India looked into this particular issue. We have the speaker on one side who said that this is violating the federalism and the previous precedents. Why? Because in the previous precedents, the central government did consult the Puducherry government, but in the specific case, we did not have the central government which actually consulted the Puducherry government. So which is why it went to the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court of India looked into this particular issue and delivered a judgment in V. Lakshmi Narayanan versus the Union of India in 2019. According to this particular judgment, laid by the Supreme Court, it said that the central government need not have to consult the Puducherry government, said the Supreme Court of India. This is where the author says that it should not have happened that way according to the spirit of this article. When we look at the nominated members are not something new. It is already present in the Constitution of India. So when we look into the Constitution of India, for Rajya Sabha, when there are people who are being appointed, these are the people who are appointed or nominated on the basis of specialization in arts. It can be science, it can be sports, so on and so forth. There is a condition that is present for those who are being appointed to the role of Rajya Sabha. But when it comes to the present nomination in the Union Territory of Puducherry, there is no such expertise that is required. So when we speak about Rajya Sabha, the expertise is required because they add value to the debates, deliberations and discussions. But in the present scenario, the Supreme Court of India should not only have looked into the bare act on the technical perspective, but instead should have also looked at the expertise as well. Currently, when you look into the legislation, currently when you look into the constitution, it does not speak about any expertise when it comes to the Puducherry. So the government in that particular case would be able to appoint any person irrespective of the expertise. That should not have happened, says the author. Ideally, the Supreme Court of India should have looked into such a clause similar to that of the Rajya Sabha and should have gone beyond the words as mentioned under the act and should have introduced a new dimension, which ultimately meant that the arbitrariness that is currently present is completely eliminated. So what are we looking at? We are looking at that this particular legislation, that which is present and the constitutional article is not letting the union territory with legislature work independently with autonomy is the second argument. The third concern voiced by the author is with respect to the administrator's power. What is happening in the union territory? Let's say for example, there is a conflict between the administrator or the lieutenant governor and we also have the council of ministers. In case of conflict, the lieutenant governor may refer this particular bill to the president of India. So the president of India will look into this particular issue and he will give the permission for the execution of a particular legislation. But who is the president of India acting on? He is acting on the terms of the council of ministers of the union government. So it indirectly means it is the union government which is executing a particular bill when it comes to a union territory with legislature. So the third concern voiced by the author is that indirectly it is the union government which is controlling the union territory with legislature. So these are the major impediments when it comes to accomplishing the democratic aspirations of that particular union territory. In fact, we have one of the landmark judgments of NCT of Delhi versus the Union of India, where the Supreme Court of India had clearly said that the lieutenant governor should not interfere in the daily affairs. But in spite of the judgment laid by the Supreme Court of India, we still have conflicts that we are witnessing in the Union Territory of Delhi. As a result, the author goes on to say that these are the major impediments. Yes, on the paper, we have the union territory with legislature, but indirectly, the constitutional article is quite absurd according to the author. And he further goes on to say the whole process of nomination is a flawed process, and ultimately, because of lot of power given to the administrator or the lieutenant governor, again, they are not able to operate in full scale. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says Federalism and India's Human Capital. The article here is speaking about decentralization and accommodating more power at the lowest level, which happens to be the Panchayati Raj or the municipalities. The article primarily focuses on various issues and concerns surrounding the powers and centralization of powers both at the central level and also at the state level in comparison to the municipalities and Panchayati Raj. What is the article trying to say? When we look at the human capital, how can we evolve it? By giving more education to them, by providing health benefits to them, and also providing increasing the human capital expenses by the government of India and the respective states. But when we look into the statistics, it gives us a very grim picture. Why? In the World Bank's Human Capital Index, the country is ranking 116th. When it comes to the National Family Health Survey 5 for the year 2019 and 20, it shows that malnutrition indicators have stagnated or declined in most states of India. And when we look into the National Achievement Survey of 2017 and the Annual Status of Education Report of 2018, it again shows poor learning outcomes. So when we speak about the human capital, what we require is the education, what we require is the health that has to be provided to the individual and the family, and we finally have to provide what is required, the basic fooding and the basic amenities. In all these cases, the Indian government and the state governments are not able to evolve, and they are not able to provide all of this, says this article. The government of India, in order to make sure that this is provided, has taken number of schemes and programs. We have the National Health Policy of 2017, which has highlighted the need for interventions to address the malnutrition. So on one side, in case there are issues that people have stunting and issues of height and weight, to address the malnutrition, we have the National Health Policy. On the basis of Niti Aayog's National Nutrition Strategy, they came up with what is called as the Poshan Abhiyan or the National Nutrition Strategy, which was launched, and then it was also part of the Integrated Child Development Scheme. In the budget 2021 and 22, we also have the government coming up with Mission Poshan 2.0. We also have the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, that has been the center's flagship education scheme since the year 2018. When we look into all these angles, yes, we have had issues in education, health and malnutrition, but the government has also come up with schemes and programs as well. In spite of these government schemes and programs, we are still not able to achieve the relevant outcome, says this article. Why is that we are not able to achieve this outcome? That is because there is more centralization and not democratization, not decentralization. More powers are not given to the lower rungs of the society, which is why we are not able to meet the outcome, says this article. Let me give you an explanation. Let's say, for example, when we look into the 7th schedule, what do we have? We have the state list, we have the central list or the union list, and we also have the concurrent list. What exactly happens? According to it, we have the entries and the number of items that are present in the state list, then we have it in the union list, and we also have it in the concurrent list. So when a particular objective has to be met, what we require is the finances. How does the finance come? The taxation that is collected will be going to the Consolidated Fund of India, and from the Consolidated Fund of India, as per the Finance Commission, the amount gets devolved. Let's say, for example, we have what is called as vertical devolution. So according to the vertical devolution, how much should go to the central government, how much should go to the state governments, will be decided by the Finance Commission. It is advisory in nature, and if the central government does accept its proposal, what we have is the devolution of the funds or vertical devolution. So according to the 15th Finance Commission, about 41% will go to the state governments. Again, there are criteria on the basis of which we will have horizontal devolution. So out of 41%, how much money should go to the state of Maharashtra, how much should go to the state of Bihar, how much should go to the state of Rajasthan, will be dependent on the criteria, and this is what is called as the horizontal devolution. So when this particular devolution of the tax takes place, these are unconditional in nature. What do we mean by unconditionality? Let's say the government of India is providing the state of Maharashtra about 1000 crores. Hypothetical numbers. So the government of Maharashtra can spend this 100 crores for whatever schemes and programs it wants to. Central government would not be under any restriction, or it cannot say that you, the state of Maharashtra, can spend only on these programs and schemes. So these are unconditional in nature. So the state governments in India can spend this particular program for anything that they want. Apart from this, we have what is called as the conditional transfers. Let's say for example, we have article called as 275. One of the articles is 275, which speaks about grant in aid. Let's say for example, if there is a particular state, it has to come up with a particular program, or it was to improvise this particular region, or it has to bring welfare schemes and programs for the scheduled tribes in a particular region. That is where grants in aid come into picture. So this article 275 is more about grants in aid. So when we are speaking about grants in aid, they are conditional in nature. What do we mean by conditional in nature? Only when the state is able to meet a particular criteria set by the central government, only then funds will be transferred. So the central government does not have a fixed criteria when it comes to the grant in aid, and can give different states different amount as well. Let's say for example, if they are wanting to improvise a particular service or achieve a national objective, or they want to bring changes when it comes to a scheduled tribe in a particular region, they have to meet the criteria as prescribed by the central government. Accordingly, we also have what is called as the centrally sponsored schemes as well. What is a centrally sponsored scheme? As the very name denotes, it is a sponsored scheme where the central government and the state governments both come into picture. Let's say there is one of the yojana initiated. So when it comes to one of these yojana, the central government will invest about 60%, or the state governments may invest about 40%. So what is happening here? We have the state governments which are also investing some amount of money when it comes to a particular yojana. So the problem with this particular process is that state governments have the money which has been given by the central government, but this money they can spend on anything. But we have the centrally sponsored scheme, which means the state governments are taking their money which is in the consolidated fund of the state, but spending on a yojana which has been given by the central government. So what do we have? We have a conditional transfer indirectly, says the author. Ideally, the state governments can spend their money on anything, but because of the centrally sponsored schemes that we have, indirectly the state governments are spending on it, says the author. Apart from this, let's say for example, they have accepted the terms and conditions of the Finance Commission. They are also ready to give about 41% to the state governments as well. But what is the major problem? Yes, they would have given the states, let's say, about 1000 crores. But what is happening? On one side, they are sanctioning that particular money. On indirectly, they can also reduce their share in the centrally sponsored scheme as well. Earlier, it might be 60 is to 40%, but because they have given 41%, it might also go back to 50% and 50%. So again, they would have given the money, but indirectly, they are making the state government spend on a particular program, says the author. So when we look into the international experiences, they suggest that most of the interventions is better when it comes to outcomes when it happens at the subnational level governments. So the subnational level governments in the present situation is about the state governments. Since the state governments do not have money at their disposal, indirectly it is being controlled by the central governments because they have more revenues, which is why the people and the yojanas is bound to suffer, says this article. Apart from the central and the state conflict, we also have the state and the panchayati and the municipality conflict as well. What do we mean by it? Let's say for example, we have the 73rd and the 74th amendment, which bolster decentralization by constitutionally recognizing panchayats and also municipalities as well. But what is happening when it comes to the state governments? They are the ones who have consolidated the power. On one side, we have the central government where it has centralized power, but at the same time, when it comes to the states, it is the state governments which have centralized the power. Why? Because we have the constitution, we have the 73rd and the 74th constitutional amendment, which wanted more powers to be devolved at the grassroots level so that they can execute a particular program. But that is not happening at the state level because there is excessive centralization by the state governments. They are not able to devolve more powers to the panchayatis and the municipalities. In fact, when we speak about this particular issue, the basic foundation once again is when it comes to the finances. Again, finances when it comes to the municipalities or For example, the panchayat is comparatively less. Why? Because when it comes to their panchayats, most of their money is through the property tax. When we speak about the property tax in India, these panchayats are just able to generate about 0.2 percentage of the GDP. When we consider the other countries, it is close by to 3% of the GDP. Since they have very less finances, since they have very less money at their disposal, again they would not be able to make changes when it comes to the economic planning, education, health or sanitation, or the social welfare when it comes to the grassroots level. So as a result, what we have is problem area even at the state level, the panchayat raj level and the municipality level. So what is the way forward? What is the article trying to convey? The article is trying to say that excessive centralization from the central level to the state level and from the state level to the panchayat or the municipality level should not happen, and more powers has to be devolved to the grassroots level, says the author in this particular case. Unconditional transfers should be taken up by the central government. They should not actually increase the component of the state governments when it comes to the centrally sponsored scheme, and at the same time more finances will also have to be given to the grassroots, especially the municipalities and the panchayat, says this article. So finally, in case we have to make sure that health parameter, education, sanitation or malnutrition is addressed, more power has to be given to the grassroots level and at the same time to the people, because excessive centralization will not help in proper implementation of the program, is what is this article all about. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says bail as right. The article here is speaking about the Bombay High Court granting conditional bail to Varvara Rao, who was an accused in Bhima Koregaon case on medical grounds. In this particular backdrop, the first important question is we understand what is this conditional bail. When it comes to the different landmark judgments of the Supreme Court as well as the High Courts, we have one of the important statements made by the Supreme Court. It has always said that jail is an exception and bail is a norm. When it comes to bail, there is what is called as conditional bail. What is this conditional bail? Let's say, for example, we have one of the important sections when it comes to the CRPC, which happens to be section 437. According to section 437 of 3, let's say, for example, there is an accused or he is suspected of committing a particular offense, and if this particular offense has a penal provision in the Indian Penal Code which may extend to 7 years or more than that for that particular offense. Let's say, for example, there is a heinous act of murder or there is a heinous act of rape. In all these cases, the imprisonment can go beyond 7 years. In these cases, the judge or the judiciary or the Supreme Court or the High Court can come up with what is called as bail conditions. What are these bail conditions? These are conditions that has to be complied by the accused. Let's say, for example, there is something called as the bond. There are conditions that are specified in the bond. All these conditions will have to be met by the accused. Or let's say, for example, he will promise the judiciary through this particular conditional bail that he would not conduct any of the activities or commit an offense similar to the offense that he has committed. And there are other set of conditions which can also be laid innovatively by the judiciary. When we consider the present case with respect to Varvara Rao, what are the various conditions? He has been granted bail on the condition that he has to stay within the jurisdiction of the special NIA court in Mumbai, which means this is the first condition that he has to comply by. So he should not be going beyond the jurisdiction of Mumbai. The second condition, he has been directed to mark his presence with the nearest police station through the WhatsApp video call. Third condition, he has been directed not to indulge in any activities or similar activities which led to registration of the FIR. Fourth condition, he has been directed not to issue any statements or speak to the media, print or electronic. in this particular case, if there is an accused who is not meeting all these conditions as set by the judiciary, in such a case, the state or the complainant who has actually filed this particular complaint can go to the court of law, seek for a cancellation of this conditional bail, and ultimately this person may have to go back to the jail as well. So the conditional bail is a scenario where conditions are laid by the judiciary and the accused will have to meet all these conditions as established by the judiciary. Why are we discussing this? That is because in the present case, we have the conditional bail that which has been given to Varvar Rao on the medical concern. But this particular article is important primarily because the accused was booked under UAPA. Whenever we speak about UAPA, getting bails is very hard, and in most of the cases, bails will be rejected. But in the present situation, the Bombay High Court has moved beyond the UAPA provisions and has given bail looking into the constitutional provisions of right to health and right to life and liberty. When we go back to the arguments put forward by the National Investigating Agency, it had said to the court of law that there was a statutory bar on granting bail under section 43D of 5 of the UAPA if the accusation against a person is prima facie true. This is what was the argument put forward by the NIA. But the courts in this particular case have gone beyond this particular reading of the legislation and has said Varvar Rao is about 82 years, he is old and he is suffering from issues, which is why we are not directly asking him to go to the government hospitals but instead directly go to the private hospitals so that he can take care of his health under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Why is this grant of bail significant? That is because when we go back to the Supreme Court of India back in the year 2019, it had given a ruling which made it completely impossible for any person to get the bail when it comes to UAPA. Because whenever the accused is charged under UAPA, he has to prove that he is not committed that particular offense. Because the accused is not able to prove, in most of the cases when a person is booked under UAPA, getting a bail is not that easy. Now, because Varvar Rao was booked under UAPA, he's got the bail. This happens to be a significant one. Apart from this, the Supreme Court had also laid recently that prolonged incarceration without any possibility of early completion of the trial could also be a ground for granting the bail. Taking these two arguments in picture, Varvar Rao was given the conditional bail, which is why it becomes significant under this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about hedgehog. When it comes to hedgehog, what are they? They are the small animals. They have very short limbs as given under this article, and they have a body which is very low to the ground. These are the insectivorous. They have a distinct characteristics. As you can see, they have these sharp spines that you can see on the body, which is harder and sharper than those of the porcupine, and they cover both the animal's back as well as the sides. So these are some of the features when it comes to this particular species. There are about 17 species around the world, but when it comes to India, there are 3 species. One is Indian long-eared or the collared hedgehog, Indian hedgehog, or bare-bellied, or what is also called as Madras hedgehog. The article here is focusing on the Madras hedgehog. Do remember, there are about 17 species, but when it comes to India, there are only 3 which can be important from your preliminary examination. What is it about this Madras hedgehog? This happens to be a tiny mammal which is endemic to the southern part of India. So it is endemic to South India and it is nocturnal and insectivorous in nature. Now what we have to draw is a comparison between hedgehog present in India and that which is present in other countries. Hedgehogs in UK, Africa and Central Asia hibernate in winter, but the ones in South India estivate in summer instead. In this particular backdrop, a small assignment that you guys will have to do is to find out what is the difference between hibernation, brumation, estivation and diapause. Please read more about what these are and put it on a comment section. Apart from this, there are various threats that are associated with the hedgehog in India. What are these associated threats? Because of the loss of habitat to agriculture, there have been a dwindling numbers. They are not protected under any of the Wildlife Act, and as a result, its population is reducing, and the exploitation of this particular species for the pet and the bushmeat trade has also meant that there is significant drop when it comes to its numbers. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about one of the tribes called as the Badaga. Badaga tribes are present in the region of Nilgiris. They live in nearly 400 villages, and these villages are called as Hattis. And do remember, the Badra speak a particular language called by the very same name, called as the Badaga language. So these are the important pointers which can be important from your preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. The union territories with legislature are created to meet the democratic aspirations of the people. Is the aim to promote democracy achieved? What are the challenges in this regard? Second question, investing in human capital through interventions in nutrition, health and education is critical for sustainable growth. In the light of the statement, explain how leveraging the true potential of our multi-federal system represents the best way forward towards developing human capital. So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and also give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.